Again, hello everyone, and welcome to Modern Interfaces for MV Applications presented by Zumasys. Thank you all for joining today. We have about a 40-minute presentation for you. We will try to keep it a little shorter if possible. We are here to talk about how you can apply different interfaces to your existing multi-value applications. And let's go ahead and get started. So there are three of us here presenting for you today. That's me, Josh Camacho, at the top. I'm a senior software development manager for Zumasys. We'll also be joined by Patrick Payne, who is the chief software evangelist for Zumasys. A great title for a guy who has so much passion about what he does, and you're really going to enjoy listening to him. And also Remington Richards, a software developer at Ganahl Lumber, who's going to walk us through what he was already able to do with this software. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. First of all, why do I need modern interfaces on my MV application? And what types of modern interfaces are available? Because there certainly is more than one. We're going to also help you discuss how to get started. And I'm going to follow back with what are the challenges to this, which is always important to be realistic. But first, let's jump straight into Remington Richards, who's going to tell us what he's already done for his company, Ganahl Lumber. Remington?
Hi, my name is Remington. I'm a software developer at Ganahl Lumber, and want to tell you about why we decided to modernize. So we wanted a mobile device in our distribution yard to help track our inventory, and we started this with a Motorola device using a VT100 terminal emulation. Over about 6-month period, we started to realize that wasn't going to work because Lumber absorbs Wi-Fi, and the connection was not strong enough to support Telnet. Connection would constantly drop as workers moved throughout the yard, and reconnection was sometimes 1 minute or more to get back to where they left off. So we decided to try and build a modern web app, and that would move our connection needs to a transaction basis based on REST services. So we now use a modern development environment for our front end of our applications. We're using modern tools such as Visual Studio Code. We chose the Angular framework. We're using Narwhal, Node.js, and we're also using the Google Material theme, which I will touch on more later as to why. We also separated our front end from our back end to make this happen. So all of our business logic lives in D3. We're a D3 shop, and then all of our presentation logic lives in the Angular framework. So we started small with a small app and a small amount of users. I think it's about 10 users total and just a few applications or a few programs to make this all work. Here's some examples of our screens. And again, the data is served up through REST services. So on the left, we have our login page. We have an ability for a user to scan with a barcode reader or type a unit tag number. They will then see some basic information that's served up from our backend that tells them about that unit, product, quantity, and then they can take some actions on that unit, right? They can move that unit to a different place, etc. So what did we achieve with this? We were able to connect a whole new set of users to our data and allow them to modify it using business rules that live on the back end. We have faster inventory metrics because we have the data coming directly from the person that's entering it and not waiting for someone else who's batching it and uploading those changes. The best part is there's easy training for these high turnover positions. Onboarding is simple because the user already knows how the app is supposed to work. Because we chose that material theme, Google has already trained them for us. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Remington. Yes, as you can see, there's definitely ways to make this work for your business as well. And I hope some of you got to see things that may work in your business as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about why would I need a modern interface? In other words, what is it that your business can do that it's not able to do right now? So let's first start with what it is that multi-value does for us right now. Why is it that we're so connected with this system? And obviously, there's incredible application performance that comes with multi-value. We're all very, very familiar with how fast this can be and how it really can do things that SQL can't. It is a flexible data model, which means that you can expand upon it, you can grow it to other areas of your business, you can even change the code base and make very easy changes to your entire system, which is also difficult to do in a SQL model because of how tight their data is. So the application development is customized to your business model because you are writing it yourself. And obviously, if you were to switch off of multi-value, which is always a common concern, that you might lose access to your historical data. So keeping in this system always has that data available to you. And yes, while training has a large curve in the multi-value world for new developers, once trained, users can operate very quickly. By the way, I come from an industry where I did not know multi-value about 15 years ago, and I had to learn it. And so I am one of these people who had to learn it. And over the course of a year, I got really familiar with how it worked. And then we really took off with connecting multi-value to the rest of the business and the rest of the world. And I also had several developers work underneath me who said once they got into the model, they really believed in it. So I do believe that this is still true today. So modern interfaces are an evolution for your software because these two people at the bottom of your screen here represent a manager who says, I don't know what I'm looking at with that blue screen. I have no idea how this could properly run my business. And then you have the new developer who comes in and says, I don't know how to develop in this. I think that I'm just going to come in and tell you need to do something else entirely. And the real problem for the two people in that screen below, and I've seen this many times, is that those two people get together and say that they need to do something different. And what they're missing, those people, is the understanding of what your data already has in it. But they do expect the richer user interfaces. And so this is a way to help give it to them without having to rip out everything you've done over the course of your career or everything that your business has done up to date. So yes, the competitive products to multi-value, if we were to rip it out, are pretty, but do they really know your business model? And I think that that becomes an issue that you'll have to discuss as you consider how you're going to move your multi-value software forward. So this slide here is what modernizing multi-value used to be like. For those of us who have tried this before, who have tried to come in and say, yes, we can make multi-value do anything, this would be a particular a sample map of what that might look like. In fact, this was taken from one of the clients that I worked with here at Zumasys, who had connected their multi-value system in Universe to a file management system, to an EDI system, to a route tracking system, and also to create some web views of it. And it was obviously, like you see, a ton of work to connect all these things. I like to think of it as the Titanic, which is my go-to comparison here. You know, those people who were just flipping the switches on the Titanic, trying to keep it running as it was actually sinking, and we don't want that to be what happens. So these days, you can actually modernize multi-value in a much, much simpler model. In fact, multi-value nowadays has the ability to connect directly to external and internal APIs, desktop applications, and web applications without having to go through all of the hoops you used to. And yes, of course, it still also does connections via terminal. So let's talk about one way that we can connect to our multi-value system, and that's directly from Windows apps. I'm just going to pause here and say that there are two sections of this that we're going to go over. The first one here is how to connect to Windows apps, and the second is how to connect to web apps, which will be hosted by Patrick. So for a minute here, let's talk about how this would look on Windows. Each multi-value partner has its way of connecting to your multi-value database. Zumasys uses products called JRCS and JAgent. Universe and U2 use UniObjects, and D3 uses something called MVS.net. And all of these allow the software, like Visual Studio, which is a Microsoft-based programming language, or NetBeans, which is Java, to come in and connect directly to your multi-value data. So these packages would need to be installed, which is a step that we'll talk about in a minute. And then you can write natively in things like Visual Studio, which is a class-based set of application data. And so I wanted to talk about, well, how does this really work? And this is what I'm calling Persistent Connection Protocols 101. So imagine that a persistent connection protocol, which is what we're here to talk about, is like a phone line. You have to dial up, you connect, and then you have a persistent connection, like a phone call. It's not like the old AOL days by any means. It's much, much faster and simpler than that, but the concept is still the same. And all three of these systems, UniObjects, MV Studio, I'm sorry, MVS.NET, and JRCS and JAgent all do this. But JRCS and JAgent and others have a way to have a helper to help make these things stay persistent. So the connections aren't dropped like a phone call where you actually have to redial so much as they can reconnect on their own. But yes, it is still a persistent connection. Once you have that connection, or once you've actually set up how to connect, I just wanted to point out, I know we don't want to look at a ton of code here, but I do want to point out that this is how easy in Visual Studio.NET you can connect to your multi-value system. So in this particular case, I'm using Visual Studio and I'm using the JRemote connection, which will connect to a JBase database. This is similar on any other multi-value platform as well. But basically, you can see that we have to pass a host and a port number, which seems familiar, and also a username and a password. All the text in red is what you need to pass. The rest of this code is being helped to be written by Visual Studio itself, which is one of the great benefits here versus writing in basic code. So we will be utilizing object-oriented programming, which it's really outside of the scope of this presentation. But the idea is that you don't want to develop software in these modern interfaces like you're developing in JBase. There are plenty of videos out there that will talk about that on Zumasys' channel, and we're developing more every day. So let's talk about what it would be once you've made that connection. On the left is something you've seen very often, which is a basic program saying, hey, here's how I connect to a customer file, and here's how I would get out the customer name and the sales value. Customer name and attribute 4, the sales value and attribute 10. And what you see over on the right is object-oriented programming, where I've set up an object called customer. And basically underneath it, there is a function to do the same thing, where you can see on lines 13 and 14 that you are still getting those two values out. Get the value from 4 and get the value from 10. But the difference here is huge. And the answers that I think the easiest way to look at this is what's written below those boxes. On the procedural programming side, it's open, read, get out, I'm done, have a nice day. And on the object-oriented side, you can say, I know what a customer is, and I can answer you back at any time. It uses a very different model. It's more similar to what we do as humans. Once that's done, you can create amazing, amazing screens and these are Windows-based screens using Visual Studio.NET that can show your data in ways that your managers haven't seen before. So all of the data behind what you're looking at on these screens is brought from JBase. In fact, all the business logic is still in JBase where you already have it. This is just a way to connect to the data and show it in a more native application that would be more familiar to a user. The next slide, I'm not sure if this is going to work very well, so I'm only going to stay on it for a minute. But the concept here is that there is many, many ways that you can deal with how this would work on screens. This video was taken from a company that I used to work for, and I used this video in a presentation I did at Zumapalooza about 2 years ago. But conceptually here, if you can see this, is that there is people using modern desktop computers and even touch screens to understand what it is that they are going to be doing, and it's all happening inside of JBase, but they're not looking at a bunch of character screens. All right, so that is a basic understanding of how you can connect to persistent connections using Visual Studio, and now I'm going to pass it over to Patrick. Sorry, Patrick, I have an extra capital in your name there, but I'm going to pass this over to Patrick, and he's going to talk about web apps. Patrick?
All right, thank you, Josh. That was great. So welcome everybody. I'm Patrick, and I'll extend this and start talking about the newer, more modern ways or RESTful ways, and kind of where it came from, and why it exists, and how that you can use it for more than just interfaces, but for all your connectivity needs. So let's jump right in. So I took the same slide here, and let's just show the first big difference, which is the world no longer is just Java and .NET. As the web took off and the big internet companies such as Google and Facebook were developing these very rich web apps, they started developing their own new languages and protocols to build applications. And they kind of moved away from the classic SQL models, and they needed to solve some issues. And really out of that designs and models came REST. And the truth is, it ends up looking much more like these more legacy connections that Josh was just talking about, which was our only choice, which is we are going to basically extend the language into your programming language, and you're going to be able to not only call the database, but let's be very important here, call our business logic, which is something is not in a SQL stuff. You'll usually see a SQL developer build an app in .NET and then connect to SQL. As web development started, they weren't going to extend a SQL server out to a browser. So they came up with this RESTful architecture, which is really just calling functions or programs between different systems. And in this case, quite often, it's the browser calling directly to your business layer and calling code directly. And it's really the development of that architecture and REST, which really kind of mirrors, again, our legacy connectors that we're talking about here. And as you can see on the chart, there's lots of options now. You have Angular, React, Go is a new language. I want to be clear, there's like a new language every 6 months out of the internet crowd. Power BI, which is our data analytics, all connecting via REST, Vue. Most of your third-party systems are now exposing their stuff through REST services, Azure, and the list just goes on. So let's talk about why this is what I really push towards, and why it's really kind of taken over the market, which is, one, it's all open standards. It's not proprietary stuff built by a vendor. And the first piece of it is the protocol, how it talks from point A to point B. And in this case, it's all just normal web stuff. So if you open up your browser and you go to a web server and you type in a URL and it brings up a page, the same technology is being used for your application to talk to your server. And this has huge ramifications. I mean, everything from, your admins understand what it is. You have support stuff out there. Your security auditors understand what the protocol is. When it has to be secured, you're securing it the same way you would secure your website, buying the same certs from the same vendors. Auditors understand all this. And when it comes to watching for hacking and everything else, it's just the protocol is understood, and your tools are then widely available to work with it. The one big difference in web protocol, from as what Josh was talking about, is that this is not like a phone call. It is, every call is one call. It's what's called stateless. And that's really designed to handle the way the internet operates and the way your phones operate. So your application can handle a bad Wi-Fi. Remington was talking about that. That's why they moved from a telnet-based application to a web-based application, because it can handle Wi-Fi disconnects and bad Wi-Fi. So this is probably the biggest reason, and you do have to kind of redesign how you build your apps, but it's the core of how all modern development is done, is in a stateless manner. So that's part one. Well, what's part two that makes this all work for us? It's the data that's sent back and forth. With REST, it's really one set of data being sent in and one data sent back. And the data that's sent back and forth is all text. It's easy to read, and there's no direct spec that says what it needs to be, but in most cases, they want it to be JSON. And what JSON is a real fancy file format that can describe complex record structures. And that works very well for us Pick guys. So it's better than a CSV file. It's better than a text file. It's kind of like XML, but lighter and easier to read. And it basically describes your data and can describe any Pick data. And that's why it's such a great mix for us. So for us, we have on the left here our typical Pick record. It's an invoice. Pick people can read this. They can see the order. They can see the multi-values for order items. And this is what historically for SQL stuff could not map very easily, and so therefore tools didn't work well for us. But with JSON, it's very easy for me to take that same record to the left and show it as JSON. And the whole key here is that we're all still talking about objects. Pick is an object. The rest of the world is all about object programming, but their objects just look a little different than our objects. Therefore, if we go through the work to convert our objects to look like their objects and then give it out to the application developer, they never need to understand a pick attribute value or sub value. They're just working with an object as they always are used to. And so that's really where the core of REST comes in. It's still the same concepts. We're putting out programming languages out to other systems, but the big difference is if it is one of these other languages, be it Go or be it JavaScript, and even the legacy ones like .NET and JavaScript, they all can make these same RESTful calls into the system. And if you get to platforms that don't know anything about Pick, there is never a library you have to install. You just use the native Ajax library and you can call right into Pick. And if you don't have a library, there's even command line tools where you can just take a D3 system, for example, and bang out and run curl, which is a command line browser, and hit a RESTful service. So it really opens up the systems and you're not stuck like we were about 15 years ago. So what we do with that, this whole webinar is talking about a modern UI, and using RESTful services, you can start building out a new UI. I'm not going to go much into that because I have other videos where I show you full examples where we can build web sites. Remington just presented some stuff he was doing in Angular with D3 with MV Connect. What I want to jump to is when we build these RESTful services and the whole concept around them, you can also use it to call other people's RESTful services from your Pick system. So there'll be a lot of third-party services out there that you could use to extend your application that just requires you to do the opposite of what we're doing when we put out a service, which is to look at their specs, see how they want a JSON payload to send in, and then call their service, get the response back in our Pick system, and use it. So we can now integrate with any third-party service that has a RESTful API. So these things, what's some examples? How about package tracking? UPS, FedEx, and the post office all offer a RESTful API to call and get package information. So that same website you go to where you can visually see it, there's a RESTful API you can hit and get a nice JSON payload of the information of where your record is, your package is. How about third-party tax services? With the complication of where tax services are getting, you can now defer to a third-party service, and as soon as you hit submit on your or calculate on your order, you can quickly shoot out to a tax service, and they'll calculate your tax for you. DocuSign is a doc signing service where you can integrate with them. Almost anything you see with Google, their mapping service, their geolocating services, all of their document services are all available through APIs. And this is an important discussion of how those sites are designed. Google builds everything as a RESTful service in the first place, and then builds their UI, usually out of Angular, to then call those APIs. So when you follow a RESTful model, you can reuse those RESTful services, not just for your API or UI, but for system-to-system integration and other stuff. So again, you will see that through all these vendors. Microsoft is the same way. You can tie right into their authentication, two-factor, their email systems, their storage, anything they're offering, they usually have a RESTful API now to do automation. And then any of your services out there that you're typically doing are available also through third-party services. If you're doing automated email out of your system, it's much better to interface with someone like SendGrid and MailChimp and use a simple RESTful API to call them. They'll have campaigns, attachments, click tracking. They'll give you all the features right out of your Pick system. You just have to populate the payload and hit their RESTful endpoint. So to show an example of that, I'm going to show a real quick, simple site I pulled up. And this was one site that if you had an IP address, they will actually geolocate it for you and tell you where in the world that address is coming from. And a lot of times you might use that through your ordering system if you want to put an extra level of security and say, hey, I'm only going to take orders out of the United States and not out of North Korea, for example. You could use a service like this. And this one has a simple example. Here I'm using curl, which is a command line browser. I can open up Chrome and type in that same URL, and it would return me this JSON payload of the geolocated information. So all the sites usually have documentation. It's straightforward. It's all text. In Pick, we offer libraries through MV Connect to let you build objects, and which then in turn are JSON. So in this case, in about 11 lines of code, I've set up a RESTful service, It's the same type of features you'll see in Python or .NET, the same information we have to populate to make a web call. We set it up. We call our browser tool. We get a response back. We work with the object. We pull the city out of that JSON and print it out. And then I run the program down below. You see me type in the IP, and instantaneously I have back a response, and I've now integrated with the third-party service. So with that in mind, let me talk about how you get started. First, you have to plan ahead. There are new tools and new technologies. I like to point out that I personally feel over my 20 years of doing this, that these newer tools are easier than the older kind of proprietary tools. The modern generation likes these. Everything's in text. It's easy to see. It's easy to read. It's just these simple records being sent back and forth, which is kind of how our Pick systems were operating. We just had simple multi-value records. We called our programs back and forth. So, you know, they're doing it a little different, and you have to get used to their tools. But I like to also remind us that we didn't pick up our Pick systems overnight either. So there is a little bit of ramp up. Decide what you want to add to your system. Just like Remington said, start small. I mean, there's no reason to move your entire application. You usually take something like one of your apps out on the floor, or maybe your order entry system, and you start there and get yourself used to what is happening. It takes a little bit of time to get ramped up. 3, you got to explore the best language to connect to your MV system. There are a lot of options. On my earlier slide, I said there's more than just .NET and Java anymore. There is a lot of different languages, and a lot of these different languages target different skill sets and what you want to get into. I always like to say there's business programmers and there's engineer programmers. So there are some languages out there that look more like Visual Basic and are easier to use, low-code developments, versus .NET and Java and Angular, which are very sophisticated, high-end languages where you can do a lot of stuff. One of the great things about RESTful stuff is your REST calls are completely reusable, no matter which front end you choose to use. So start with something simple, get yourself going, and then start stepping up to more advanced stuff. Your RESTful calls you made will be reusable as you step through the tools. And quite often, you may even bring in a third-party company and have them build the tools later. And definitely look at our MV Connect, or find out from your vendor what they offer in the same space. I personally believe that we've got the best tool set out there. I had 20 years of working with these open source tools, and I feel we've built a tool that's the most open. But see what your vendor's also offering. We do have a 90-day trial available of MV Connect. What I feel is a huge advantage of MV Connect is that it's cross-platform. So if you choose to move from your vendor's database to, let's say, OpenQM or JBase or any U2 product out there, the code you do in MV Connect will stay the same, and it's transportable. So it's not a vendor-specific tool. And we also have plenty of YouTube videos on our channel to help you. In fact, I have a very long one of 2 hours that steps you through how to make a sample to-do app using MV Connect. And then familiarize yourself with JSON and objects. This is the key and the glue to what's really opening up. The model is actually much more like our model than it is SQL tables and rows. I think if you get deeper into it, you'll actually feel some pride that our model did kind of come back into the market. It's a more verbose version of our model, but it is where you can show one, let's say, order in one record, which is what we're used to. They're objects. Objects are really what I feel Pick always fundamentally was. And then don't forget to call Zumasys. We're here to help you. We have not just the applications and the software, but we have software services. We're here to help you for the entire journey. So thank you very much, and I'm now going to turn this back to Josh.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Yeah, I find the whole RESTful services to be quite amazing, and I know there's plenty of courses that you can take online to do it, to learn it yourself. It's really interesting to see such an open source motive that's happening here in this industry. So I hate to bring the bad news, but I do want to talk a little bit about what the challenges are that you'll face, because I assume that some of you are thinking, how can I use this for me? And this is all great. And how do I just buy it and hit go? Or how do I just do it and hit go? And the answer is, well, there's going to be some things that you get in the way. So I'm sure that this picture says 1,000 words here, but basically, what is it that you're going to be building on? Because if you have a structure of your data that is incomplete, if you are not keeping up your historical records properly, if you don't have a transactional system that can find a transaction that you want to know about without having to search through an entire list of transactions, those types of issues in your data structure will be carried through to this next generation of display. So I think it's important to really understand what it is that you have to start with. Does your business have separate subroutines for business and presentation logic? I've certainly seen some that are not. For example, where you are creating an invoice record and printing a line to the printer at the same time. That type of logic will need to be addressed and somewhat rewritten, because you obviously don't want your online app that you're building to be sending lines to the printer. That's not how this would work. You have to separate those two. Are your data files properly documented? This will be important because at the end of the day, we are extending out how we're going to develop in your multi-value system from one developer or someone who knows the whole system to people who just need to get a hold of a part of it. Like, I just need to be able to enter an order, so you tell me what I need. And so if your data files are properly documented, then those people will have a better chance of getting started and moving quickly. By the way, you can document in dictionaries if that's how you're doing. You can also just document straight in Excel. I've seen a lot of people do that too, where they have their multi-value data sets documented in Excel as to what their files actually look like. And then, as we've been saying throughout this entire webinar, do you want to create a new feature or enhance an existing feature? These things are important because you have to have a goal in mind of what you want to do before you get started. Otherwise, this would be way too overwhelming. And using new technologies is going to require new training, and we don't want to skip over this slide. I think it's important to understand that this is an investment of your time and your resource, but ultimately it will go very far for you. Up on the screen now are just a couple of ways that you can learn some technologies to get started. CSS3, HTML5, and JavaScript all go very well together to create web applications, and then you can apply Angular and React on top of that. You can also learn Visual Studio, which is a beast in its own, like all the rest of these, or you can learn Java. The other option is that you might be able to hire new talent who already has this. And this is, again, going back to the separation of your business logic from your presentation layer. One really interesting idea that it's hard to put into a slide, but the idea of keep your business logic where it is in your multi-value system and just allow people to communicate with it through a RESTful service or through a persistent connection. And then all of a sudden you can hire people who have no idea how to actually enter a purchase order in your system, but they can easily design a front end for you using these tools. That's a huge benefit here versus having to hire a JBase or a multi-value developer who would have to learn your entire set before they could get started. And this process does start slow, so I encourage you to be patient. Much like what you see here, there's going to be a ramp up to get things going to where people will even start to see results. I do encourage you to remember your end goal and to keep evolving it as you move forward up this ramp up. What is it that you're really trying to accomplish here? And probably it's going to be something like, I want to bring online a department that can't use terminal windows, or I need to give better presentation views to my sales staff so they can operate faster, or to managers or whatever. But those types of things need to be kept in mind, and don't forget. We are here to help too. Yes, we are the provider of some of the multi-value platforms, but we are here actually to help you with any multi-value platform. We believe in multi-value. We live and breathe it every day, and we're happy to help you out in whatever it is that you need to get your system moving. We do support D3, Universe, JBase, OpenQM, and more, so feel free to give us a call and we can help you with that. Our current portfolio of products, just to let you know, is the two databases on top, JBase and OpenQM. We also offer AccuTerm, which, if you have not seen AccuTerm, as I hadn't in 15 years, I highly recommend you take a look. If you're used to connecting in via PuTTY or any other way into your terminal-based system, you are missing out. AccuTerm has a great way to help develop your basic programs, a great way to create profiles and help store how people are going to connect. There's even a mobile version of this, and it's really amazing, and I regret not knowing about it sooner in my career. MV Connect is, as Patrick said, our platform to connect RESTful services into your multi-value platform. And then finally, we offer multi-value software services, which is where we're hoping that you might be interested in telling us a little bit more about your problems so that we can help you solve them. Which brings me all the way back to Remington, who's going to discuss how software services and other things helped him take off with his project. Remington?
Hello again. So when we decided to go down the web app tunnel, we started with software services from Zumasys. They helped us get MV Connect up and running. I watched a lot of Patrick's YouTube videos in the beginning just to kind of get a little thing going. And then from there, we had to decide how we wanted to develop our modern front end. We had to decide what language, what framework, and then we had to go down the training for all those things. So that process was about 8 months for me personally. I was the one that spearheaded it, and I went through Codecademy for some API from scratch, 8-week intensive course, learning all about the ins and outs of API development and what a good API should look like. And then I went through Udemy to get more training on the Angular framework, Google Material Theme. And the reason we chose Angular over the other flavors, Angular is backed by Google, and I think that's a good horse to be on. And it's also an entire full framework. It handles everything in the Angular framework, as opposed to like React is more of a visual library. And Vue is a good one too, but it's for smaller applications. If you're a smaller shop that just has a few applications, then any framework's going to work for you. If you're trying to build out to enterprise level and have dreams of 60, 70 screens, 60, 70 programs, 500 people running these things, I'd really urge you to go down the Angular route. And we're now at the point that we use Zumasys software services to help write some of our backend APIs. And then we have those APIs then served up to other third-party developers that know how to write in Angular. And then in our own shop, we also write backend APIs. So we've really separated the two worlds so that all of our business logic, all of our business rules, we still control all those things, but now we're writing them in RESTful services that get served up to people that just need JSON objects to then write us new front ends. So I think that's it.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Remington. How's everybody doing so far? I can't hear you. No, I really can't hear you, but I hope you're doing just fine. We wanted to take a moment to tell you about a multi-value contest that we are hosting. The concept is that multi-value has a lot of people in it that know a lot about this, and we're trying to create a platform so that people can get their ideas out and help us understand where this product is going. And so there is going to be a $10,000 winner for the best idea. Feel free to take a look at zumasys.com/contest, and you can take a look. This contest does end at the end of this month for submissions. So if you want, go ahead and get your submission in the next week and a half. Thank you guys so much for attending. I hope that you found some great information out of this webinar, something valuable for you to take back to wherever it is you need to take it. On this page, I want to point out that if you are interested in contacting Zumasys about its software services to help you get started, I want to give you Becky Cravens-Waite's email address, beckyc@zumasys.com. She's the quickest way for you to get in and just start asking some questions about what this is really about. And then also you have your presenters from Zumasys on here, Patrick and Josh, and our email addresses. Feel free to reach out to us directly. We'd love to get some feedback if you have some for us. And if you'd like to reach out to Remington as well, we'll go ahead and get his information to you if you just contact us at one of our email addresses. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much. And look for more presentations coming from Zumasys in the next couple of months. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.